What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, November 26th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 5-game NBA slate tonight. A lot of games with pretty close spreads. Hopefully should be a pretty fun slate. I think that there are some interesting things to talk about. There's a lot of good plays. We've had some value open up already with injuries, and we have at least one Q tag that we are still waiting on that will be at least somewhat important with Mike Conley. We did already get Jordan Poole ruled out about an hour ago, so that was one of the big pieces of news that we are waiting on. So not too much injury news, but a couple of other things that we are still waiting on. Going to go game by game, as always on this show, looking at my player exposures if the slate started right now. Gives me an opportunity to see if I am making any mistakes, if there's anything I need to adjust, and also to talk through strategy, how I see things from an ownership standpoint, rotational standpoint, all of that. So going to start things off here with the Bulls taking on the Wizards in Washington, two of the faster paced teams in the NBA. Bulls are tied for first with Atlanta. Washington is fourth in pace. Neither team plays defense at all. Washington has the worst adjusted defensive rating in the NBA. Chicago has the third worst. So we have a very high total here. These games are pretty often the most appealing DFS games when you get two teams that are not particularly good, but they will just both go out there and run up and down the floor and not play any defense. So I expect to get to a lot of this game in general. And then you do also have Jordan Poole not playing, as I mentioned a minute ago. That opens up some value on the Washington side too. But starting on the Bulls side, no Patrick Williams again. He is out for a bit. That doesn't it does open stuff up. It doesn't open up anything new. He's been out for a few games, but we saw Ayo Dosunmu get the start last game. I assume he's starting again today. Torrey Craig started the first game that Williams was out, but that was a game against Milwaukee, and Torrey Craig has always been, for lack of a better phrase, the Giannis stopper on whatever team he's on. Not that anybody actually really stops Giannis, but I think that mostly is why Craig started that game. Maybe he starts this one, and if he does, obviously it changes things. But I assume that you're getting Dosunmu in the starting lineup again, like you did the last couple of games. And he's reasonably priced still. Salary hasn't moved too much. Coming in at 5,500, point guard and shooting guard eligible. But Nikola Vucevic is where I'm starting on the Bulls side. He is projected for 25% ownership. I'm getting to 36%. Again, this game is pretty likely to be close. You have a 6 or 7 point spread here. It is the widest spread on the slate, but that's not really saying much because one, there's only 5 games, and two, most of these games are likely to be very competitive. So I do think that it's likely you get the full range of Vooch's minutes here, if not an extra minute or two, like we have seen in competitive games. I projected him for 33 and a half minutes, makes him look very, very good here in a nice matchup against Washington, as I mentioned before. Josh Giddey at 6,400, I think, is very interesting in tournaments. I went to 28 minutes. I think that's a little bit higher than some other places that I've looked. Not by a huge margin, but I think that Patrick Williams being out does actually have a positive impact on Josh Giddey's minute projection. Not that it moves the needle that much, but without Patrick Williams, it does become a little bit more difficult for the Bulls to close without Josh Giddey, or at least to play a lot of minutes down the stretch without Josh Giddey. When you have Williams in there, you have the ability to run lineups like Kobe White, Dosunmu, Levine, Williams, Vooch, and have Giddey on the bench down the stretch. Now that's more difficult to do. They'd have to go to like Torrey Craig or Buzelis or something like that. And I think that they're less likely to do so than when Patrick Williams is healthy. So I do think it's a little bit of a bump for Josh Giddey. For the season, Giddey has averaged, I think, 26 minutes per game. And as you can see here, I did project him for 28. 27 minutes per game for the season. I went 28 here. So I think it's a small bump, but it does increase his upside. It does make it a little bit easier for him to stay on the floor and play more minutes. 6,400 is a pretty good price tag. We know that he's a solid point per minute guy. Really, it just comes down to his playing time. And that salary is creeping up a little bit, but with Williams out, again, I think it is a benefit. 1.12 DraftKings points per minute for Giddey so far this season. And he's not scoring dependent. About a 21% usage rate, 32.5% assist percentage is the highest on the team, 12% rebounding percentage. So he can contribute across every stat category, which is nice, especially when you're going up against a fast-paced team like the Wizards. Obviously, you expect Giddey probably to score at a higher clip than usual because the Wizards don't play defense, but also you just get more possessions, and Giddey can take advantage of that in a variety of ways. So I like him quite a bit. Ayo Dosunmu, 5,500. I'm not getting as much as the field. Not a great point per minute guy. Does probably play a lot of minutes. I projected 32 here. I do think that there is some wiggle room. We saw him play like 38 minutes in his first start. That was the NBA Cup game that they clearly really still cared about, though. Both them and the Hawks played through garbage time with their starters. They were chucking shots at the end. Immediately after that game, Billy Donovan said that he played Dosunmu and Kobe White both more minutes than he wanted to. I think 32 minutes, give or take, is more in line with where we see Dosunmu typically. But again, I think if he played a little bit more, I wouldn't be shocked. Seeing that I am less than the field, I might end up just giving him an extra minute because I don't have a lot of conviction on 32 minutes here. I think 32, 33, 34, I think those are all very reasonable minutes projections. But one way or the other, you're basically playing, if you are playing Dosunmu, you're playing him for the playing time. 0.81 DraftKings points per minute. Moving into the starting lineup just means playing more minutes with Zach LaVine. So you're getting a playing time bump, but you are not in a situation where you're going to get a lot more shot volume playing with LaVine and Vooch and Kobe White. Buzelis, 4K on DraftKings. Also, I know 4K on FanDuel, so a little bit better play on FanDuel, but I think he looks good here as well. B-Driz said in chat, not concerned with Buzelis' increasing role. I'm not sure what that was referring to. I'm not concerned about it for Josh Giddey because there are all these minutes available from Patrick Williams not playing, so you can give more minutes to Buzelis without it being a negative for Josh Giddey at all, or anybody else really at all. He's clearly ahead of Torrey Craig in the rotation, assuming Craig doesn't start again. He's ahead of Talen Horton-Tucker in the rotation. So I do think he's an interesting value play here. I'm a little surprised he's only projected for 6% ownership. I'm getting about 2x the field, and the playing time has looked good recently. Now, again, there have been kind of some extenuating circumstances, but I also do think he is getting some of those Patrick Williams minutes. So I do think that's likely to continue. 0.87 DraftKings points per minute so far this season. Not an elite fantasy producer, but certainly getting it done enough for a 4K price tag here. Jalen Smith backing up Nikola Vucevic. His playing time should simply be 48 minus whatever Vooch plays. So I have him at 14 and a half minutes here, but he is a good point per minute guy. He is only $3,600. And the appealing thing here at low ownership on a 5-game slate is that if Vooch gets in foul trouble or the second unit goes on a run and Billy Donovan leaves them out there or whatever, if Jalen Smith somehow finds a way into more minutes, he's going to produce in those minutes. He's a good fantasy producer. You don't really have to worry about the production on a per minute basis. It's just a matter of, does he get on the floor? And the answer typically is going to be he gets on the floor for 14 or 15 minutes. But in those games where he does get out there for 18 or 19 minutes for some reason, he pretty quickly becomes a really good value. So there is enough volatility here that he makes some sense in large field tournaments, but not a priority for me. Obviously, I do prefer Vooch. I don't really want them together since they directly negatively correlate in their playing time. Kobe White, I'm not getting much of here, and I wish I were getting more. He's getting 18% ownership. It's a really good matchup. You can see here I went to 33 minutes. Again, you could make the case that maybe he plays a little bit more just because in competitive games, if he's playing well, he can. But overall for the season, Kobe White averaging 33 minutes per game. Even if you look at recent games, 31 and a half minutes per game last 5, 33 minutes per game over his last 3, which includes a 37-minute game, 30, 37, 32, 33, 25 minutes in a blowout over his last 5 games. So I found it difficult to get that much higher than 33 minutes. But if you wanted to go a little bit higher, it would be fine. Either way, the ceiling looks pretty good for him. It's just that he is priced up a bit at 7K for the season, producing just over 1 fantasy point per minute. And I think I skipped over him, but Zach LaVine, 7,800, also about half the field there. And again, it's not that I think LaVine's a bad play or anything like that. He's just right now, at least, not showing up in as many of my lineups as he is for the field, which could change by lock. It may not. It's a perfect example, though, of, I've mentioned it a lot. Looking at somebody's player exposures like we are on this show don't tell you the whole story, because there's going to be a lot of guys like Zach LaVine that just look fine. And it just so happens that of the 100 lineups I'd be playing right now, he's only in 12% of them. If I grab another 100 lineups in, 20 minutes, he might be in, 25% of them. So he's just somebody that if you have lineups where you need somebody in his price range that has a high ceiling, obviously fits the bill, as long as ownership doesn't really matter. If you need to save ownership in lineups, maybe you're just playing some other popular guys at a high rate, then maybe you pivot off of Levine. There are always going to be, high upside plays in this range, but as long as ownership's not a concern, Levine is going to look like a good play in a really good matchup. Optimal Prime said doesn't make sense that Giddey doesn't get like 30 plus minutes. He must be terrible at defense. Yeah, I don't think he's really known for his defensive abilities. On the Washington side, we do have some value here with no Jordan Poole. Poole being out also opens up stat production opportunities. So it's not just, like on the Bulls side where Patrick Williams is out, that's mostly just opening up minutes because Patrick Williams isn't a high usage guy. He's not a high assist guy. Jordan Poole, obviously very, very different. 28% usage rate this season, 27% assist percentage. So you're taking that off of the floor. Keyshawn George most likely starts in his place. He started the last game without him, played 29 minutes. He's averaging over 30 minutes per game as a starter. I went to 30 minutes here. He's only 4,200. He has forward eligibility too, which is really nice. Overall this season, 0.79 DraftKings points per minute for George, but he's played 216 minutes without Jordan Poole on the floor. He's at 0.98 DraftKings points per minute in that sample. Now, that sample is going to be somewhat biased because a lot of the time that Jordan Poole's not on the floor, you're not going to have like Kyle Kuzma on the floor, especially because Kuzma missed a chunk of games. Also, if Jordan Poole's not on the floor, a lot of the time you're going against the team's second unit. So I don't think that George is actually a 1 fantasy point per minute guy here, but he is somebody that can take on and pick up more production without Jordan Poole. Kyle Kuzma also showing up in a ton of my lineups. He's likely to be the highest owned or one of the highest owned guys on the slate. And for me, hasn't played a ton this season because of injury, but we have seen the playing time ramp up recently. I had mentioned on a show the other day that I thought his minute ceiling was a little bit higher than he was getting credit for because he had favorable rotations early in games and then the Wizards were getting blown out and you weren't getting him in the fourth quarter. A couple games ago, he finally played 34 minutes. Last game without Poole, he played about 30 to 31 minutes, but that's also a game where he lost about 3 minutes to foul trouble at the end of the second quarter. So I think the playing time for Kuz looks really good here. The matchup's obviously really good. I went to 32 minutes. I think if this game is competitive down to the end and he's not in foul trouble, he probably does play, 33, 34 minutes. So really like him here anyway. And then you get Jordan Poole out, which just opens up more opportunities for him. Going back to the start of last season, since Poole and Kuzma were both on the team last year, Kuzma's at 1.22 DraftKings points per minute with a 30.9% usage rate, 21.5% assist percentage without Jordan Poole on the floor. Looks like a really good play here. The ownership is certainly there, but I don't really care. I think he's underpriced. 6,300 is just factoring in all of these games where Kuzma played less than 30 minutes in his return from injury or where, Washington got blown out and all of that. So in a game that does have a single digit spread in a really good spot, a lot of extra possessions here going up against the Bulls, Kuzma's just going to look good. He's only averaging just shy of 29 minutes per game for the season. But again, just at this point projects higher than that from a playing time standpoint. So you're getting a reduced price tag. Alexander Sarr, 5K, power forward center. He's been playing a bit more recently as well. Now, foul trouble obviously can limit that. We have seen that be an issue at times this year, but 31 minutes last time out, 28 the game before that for Sarr, 24, 24, and 31 over his last 5. So you're at 27.5 minutes over his last 5 games, 26 minutes per game for the season. 5K price tag with power forward eligibility looks really, really good. I'm right in line with the field. Field's at 45%. I'm getting to 44. I think he was in the cash lineup I built earlier along with Kuzma and George. Not positive, but I'm pretty sure. I know somebody asked about cash earlier. Joval, 25% owned, only $4,800. He is essentially the backup center behind Sarr. Assuming that this game's competitive, you will probably get 48 minutes from them, maybe like 46 if they go small for a couple of minutes. But especially going up against a Vooch-led front court, you're going to get the majority of the minutes going to these two. Valanciunas typically giving you 18 to 20 minutes. I projected it down the middle at 19. Very, very good point per minute guy. The only downside here is that it's really difficult for him to play more than 20 minutes unless Sar is in really bad foul trouble or something. But he's not priced to play that many minutes either. He's only 4,800. 1.36 DraftKings points per minute is exceptional fantasy production when he's on the floor. And it's only a 5-game slate. So the opportunity cost at the position is lower as well. Valanciunas looks good. Corey Kispert, 4,400, played 36 minutes off the bench without Poole last game. I didn't project that, but I do think that we're right back to Corey Kispert playing around 30 minutes, give or take, off the bench with no Poole. It just opens up minutes. Kispert's not the best point per minute guy. Or sorry, and for Joval, that was without Poole on the floor. But either way, very good point per minute guy. Joval is. Kispert for the season, 0.67 DraftKings points per minute. You're not expecting a lot of production out of him. You are hoping that he gets hot from three, runs into some rebounds, but the playing time looks really good at 4,400, especially when you have shooting guard and small forward eligibility. Justin Sports said how many Wiz in cash. My lineup right now has 4 of them. I believe I have Kuzma, George, Sar, and Kispert. Kispert's kind of been in and out of it all day. I think Sar has pretty consistently been in it, but right now I have 4. Koulibaly, 21% owned. I have 22%. Should play massive minutes here. He missed a game or two, came back, and immediately just started playing big minutes again. 38 minutes last game, 40 the game before that, missed 3 games ago, 26 in a blowout, 38 the game before that. He's averaging 35 and a half minutes per game over his last 5. And that's including that blowout. And there are just more minutes available in general without Poole as well. Koulibaly is likely to be one of the minutes leaders on tonight's slate. 5,700, still a very reasonable price tag as well. And we've also seen him take a step forward as a fantasy producer too. 0.83 DraftKings points per minute for him overall this season. So he's not just a complete, defensive player that, you're hoping runs into steals and isn't going to do anything offensively. Without Poole on the floor this season, he has produced 0.8 DraftKings points per minute. So you haven't seen much of a change there. 16% usage rate, 16% assist percentage, still not a super high usage guy, not the primary guy in any offensive category, but he is doing a bit more and has just looked better as a player so far this season. And then Malcolm Brogdon, kind of surprised I'm not getting more of him, but probably just has to do with how much of the rest of the Wizards I'm getting to. His playing time has ramped up recently as well. 26 minutes 2 games ago, 25 minutes yesterday, last game rather, and he had some kind of abbreviated rotations last game too. So I do think that there is a chance that you could even see a little bit more playing time here if he does have kind of more standard rotations. At 5,600, he does look like a good value. He looks even better on FanDuel at 5,300 if you're playing over there. But he just happens to be somebody that right now I'm not getting as much of, kind of in that like Zach LaVine bucket where if I have more Brogdon in an hour and a half, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't care. But in general, just getting to a ton of Wizards. I assume they'll probably be my highest owned team today, getting to a lot of Bulls on the other side as well. Hopefully this is just a very high scoring game. And it's a very chalky game too. None of this really is sneaky, even though like there are some of these guys I'm over the field on, but none of it's sneaky. Everybody knows this game looks really good. There's not a whole lot I don't think that you can do about it. Moving on to Milwaukee at Miami. Dre Everyday said, why am I getting so much Keyshawn George? And is it a good play today? Yeah, he should be starting in place of Jordan Poole. So, yeah, he looks good. Moving to Milwaukee, Miami, much, much less appealing game here. Giannis is my highest owned guy at 9%. Field is at 9%. He's $12,000. He has power forward eligibility. That price tag is still up from when Dame was missing time. And the big issue with Giannis on this slate is that Victor Wembanyama exists and is $1,200 less expensive on DraftKings. And they basically project the same. I think you could actually argue, like, it wouldn't be crazy to say that you have a higher projection on Wemby than on Giannis. Both great point per minute guys, but Wemby on the team with the higher total, and Wemby is a lot cheaper. So he's just going to look really, really good. And it's going to be tough to prioritize Giannis over him. That said, it makes Giannis a very good pivot in individual tournament lineups where you've used you don't have to, let's say you have a lineup you're looking at, you don't have to sacrifice a lot to get from Wemby to Giannis. You can just save a lot of ownership without sacrificing any upside by going to Giannis. But in lineups where you would have to sacrifice elsewhere significantly, you're probably going to be better off just getting Wemby in those lineups because the price difference is so big. So I think that is, why I'm not getting to a ton of Giannis, why the field's not there either. But anytime you're seeing a sub 10% on Giannis on a 5-game NBA slate, it's by default a pretty interesting play. Same can be said here for Dame at 8,900. Again, I'm right in line with the field, 7% for me, 7% for the field. It's Damian Lillard. He has a high ceiling, but there is a lot of guard value on this slate. There's a lot of good guard plays in general. So you're seeing not only a pretty high price tag on Dame, but also a pretty high opportunity cost when you consider we've only talked about one game so far, and there were still like 8 guards that look good between Josh Giddey, Keyshawn George. Actually, George is a forward, but Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, if you're playing him at guard, Malcolm Brogdon, just other, I think there was one other guard on Washington, maybe, I don't remember. But point being, there's a lot of good guards on this slate. So Dame, again, more of a luxury than a necessity. Bobby Portis, it's Bobby Portis. He's 5,500. We all know what the Bobby Portis Nuke game looks like, where he just gets hot. He plays 28 minutes and puts you in a really, really good position. His playing time has been down a bit in general lately. The last couple of games, though, it has rebounded somewhat. We've seen a pretty prolonged stretch of him just playing like 20, 22 minutes. Did play 27 last time out, played 23 the game before that. He's averaged 23 and a half over his last 5, 24 for the season. I went to 23 and a half minutes here. Again, if he lands in a lineup here or there as a contrarian play, fine. The ceiling is really, really high, but obviously not a priority because he's expensive enough that in about 24 minutes, he's not going to look great. I'm not getting to Brook Lopez here at 6K, but I did want to point out that he is playing massive minutes in competitive games. Same goes for Gary Trent at 4,100. Neither of these guys are showing up for me, but I think that they are both also on that list, kind of with Bobby Portis, of like kind of interesting, just low-owned contrarian plays based on the playing time we're getting from them recently. In competitive games, you can get as much as 37, 38 minutes at times from Brook Lopez. Gary Trent is playing upper 20s in minutes now. Not a great point per minute guy, but only 4,100 at no ownership. So I did want to mention both of them, even though I'm not getting to them. On the Miami side, Terry Rozier is probable, so he should be back, which makes this rotation, not that it was super appealing anyway, but less appealing. Kevin Love is showing up for me a little bit, which I could do without. Kind of hope that goes away by lock, but at the same time, I do, I guess, understand it. I projected him for 15 minutes. That gave him 2 minutes alongside Bam. He did play alongside Bam a bit last game. I might take those 2 minutes away just because with Rozier back, that is one extra body in the rotation, and it does make it a little bit less likely that Love gets any run alongside Bam. Either way, I don't think Love's any sort of a priority. This is just clearly he's getting 0 ownership. And so if he goes off, great, but like I don't think he's actually a good play here. He's 4K, he's center only. If he were power forward eligible, I think that would be kind of interesting. But mostly I think this is just my projection on him being a little bit too high and him just popping up because he has 0 ownership. Tyler Hero, clearly a high ceiling guy, but he's also up to 8K. So I'm not really getting to him. But if you want to use him to be a contrarian piece in some lineups with a high ceiling, works perfectly fine. Same goes for Bam. Same goes for Jimmy Butler, wherever he is at. Butler getting 8% ownership at 7,800. Bam getting 3% at 8,500. Miami, to me, is pretty much just a tournament team where you should be looking to the 3 main pieces, Hero, Butler, and Bam. And if they fit into a lineup here or there, it's fine. If they don't, I'm not overly concerned about not having them. Although, across 100 lineups, obviously, I'd probably prefer to have at least a little bit of one of these guys since they're so good. But I also understand why I'm not getting there, why it's tough to prioritize them. Houston taking on Minnesota. Jalen Green is questionable for the Rockets. He did go through shoot around. I assume that he is playing. And this is a pretty decent game, I think. It's not on the same level as the Bulls and Wizards game, but you do have some plays to get to. I like Alperen Şengün quite a bit here at only 8% ownership. From what I can tell, I think the industry has underprojected his minutes a little bit because Houston's been in some blowouts lately, and it's just pulling down Şengün's average playing time. If you look at the season, he's averaged 29 and a half minutes per game. Over his last 5, he's at 30.8. But if you look in the more competitive games, 36 minutes last time out, 39 a few games ago. So the playing time is volatile, but I think that if this game's competitive and you do only have a 3-point spread, if he avoids foul trouble, I think you're more likely to be in that like 32, 33 minute range than 29 to 30. And that's what I'm banking on here. It's getting him into about 20% of my lineups. And clearly this is not somebody that I mind playing. I don't care about this matchup, Rudy Gobert being a good rim protector, all of that. Şengün is just such a good player in general, contributes in so many ways, good passer, all of that. I'm not concerned about the defensive presence of Gobert or anything here. Jabari Smith at 4,500, getting 15% ownership. I think that's warranted. His playing time has been all over the place. We got 37 minutes last game, and we have seen that a couple of times lately. He had another game, I think like 6 or 7 games ago, where he played 35 in like a blowout or something crazy. 29 minutes over the last 3 on average, 28 for the season. I projected 30.5 here just because his rotations have looked pretty good in general lately. At 4,500, it makes him look like a pretty good value. Amen Thompson at 5K, shooting guard, small forward. Playing time is volatile because he's coming off the bench, but he has 30-plus minute upside. He played 35 minutes last game. That is not the norm. He's averaging 26 minutes per game over his last 10, which is how I projected him, but he is at a price point where if you just project his normal minutes off the bench, he looks like a good value. And then if he does play well, if that second unit gets hot, he very quickly can become somebody that you need to have, especially given that he has shooting guard and small forward eligibility. 1.02 DraftKings points per minute for him this season. Jalen Green, like I said, questionable, getting 7% ownership. I got to 9%, about a fantasy point per minute this year. Does have the second highest usage rate just behind Alperen Şengün on the team at 27.5%. 50.3% true shooting this year. 30.7% three-point percentage is awful. But when you're talking about a one-game sample, that actually is kind of an argument for playing them in tournaments because he's averaging a fantasy point per minute while shooting absolutely awful. In any one game, he can get hot and actually shoot like a competent NBA player. And when that happens, he's going to just destroy a $6,400 salary. So the ceiling for him is higher than the median projection gives it credit for. And then Fred VanVleet getting around the field on him at 7,100 as well should give you mid-30s in minutes. Also, Power pointing out that this is a cup game that potentially matters here. So should see some tighter rotations, which is always a good thing to look at. I still don't know exactly what that means for Houston in general, other than obviously, barring foul trouble, they would want to play Şengün more, VanVleet, and Jalen Green and Brooks. But like the whole Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Amen Thompson thing, it's still such volatile minutes, even in games that are competitive, that there's not one of them I can just like give a bunch of extra minutes to. But it does collectively make that group look better. I'm not getting to Tari Eason right now. I projected 24 minutes to him, but he is up to 5,800. He is a very good point per minute guy. It's just difficult to get there at 5,800. Also, not getting to Dylan Brooks at 4,200. I projected him for about 31 minutes, so I actually thought he would show up a little bit, but I think it just has to do with how much value opened up on Washington, which means that in large field tournaments, if you want to pivot away from, say, Corey Kispert's ownership to Dylan Brooks, you're not sacrificing upside at all. You might be sacrificing median projection a little bit, but you're also getting a lot of a big ownership discount. So I think Dylan Brooks is in like that same bucket I've been mentioning where I don't have him right now, but low owned, cheap, certainly has a path to being as good or better than most of the guys priced around him. On the Minnesota side, Mike Conley is questionable. He's missed the last couple of games. If he is out, you probably get, I think it was DiVincenzo last game. DiVincenzo started last game. Alexander Walker, I think it started 2 games ago. You got 27 minutes from Alexander Walker last game. You got 29 from DiVincenzo. It's a benefit to both of them if Conley is out. Right now, I have Conley projected in. He is $4,600. He's getting 14% ownership. I only went to 26 minutes because Mike Conley is old as dirt and he missed the last 2 games with a sprained toe. So I wanted to be kind of cautious with his playing time. But it is worth mentioning that for a lot of this season, he's just been playing like 24 minutes per game. Lately, prior to the injury, he had played a bit more. We got a 30-minute game out of him. We got a 37-minute game out of him. So it is kind of scary not getting more of him, not projecting him higher. But I did want to be kind of cautious since we know that Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a solid player. The Wolves are happy to play him. They're happy to play DiVincenzo. Rob Dillingham had been picking up a few minutes even prior to Conley's injury. So I projected like 4 minutes to him. But if Dillingham just is completely out of the rotation, then Conley maybe plays like 30 or something. So it is, I think, a pretty volatile projection here, but the ownership is there. I'm not getting quite as much as the field. Julius Randle, high upside, nothing that, really stands out from a projection standpoint. Rudy Gobert has been playing pretty big minutes as well. I projected him for like 34.5. Still didn't really get him into lineups though at 6,600. I think that is probably a function of getting to Alperen Şengün at lower ownership, getting a lot of the centers from the Washington game. I was over the field on Vooch. I was over the field by a little bit on Joval. Also, I haven't looked, but I think I probably have a lot of Walker Kessler, which I will talk about. But if that is the case, that would be another reason that it's just hard for me personally to get to Gobert. But if you have less of any of those other guys, I do think Gobert looks perfectly fine here. Going to the San Antonio and Utah game. But first, a reminder, don't forget to sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. That is the site that I started with Utical, Brick75, and Nerdy Tenor. Very successful DFS players, group of DFS players over there. We have a library of instructional videos, strategy videos on how we approach different sports, different topics in DFS. We also have a Discord with not only us, but a lot of other very good players bouncing ideas off of each other from a strategy standpoint. Our goal over there isn't so much to do what I'm doing right now and talk about every game and every player and, give plays and all of that. It's more so to help you as quickly and efficiently as possible improve your performance and get to a place where you can sustainably win and be a little bit less reliant on what I'm doing right now and other, tool sites and all of that in general. If you kind of, no matter how you approach DFS, there's going to be somebody that speaks your language and can probably help you out, has had success playing the way that you like to play. Utical, very heavy on just knowing sports and understanding how things interact within games. Great person to talk to if you want to get better at that, or if that's how you think about DFS. Nerdy Tenor, very good at programming, has built a lot of his own stuff. Great person to talk to if you're trying to experiment with building your own projections or sim models or whatever it may be, and you have questions or want to potentially save yourself time before you find out something doesn't work. Brick also has done a lot of that. Good person to talk to as well. And then I'm kind of somewhere in the middle of all of that. I have videos on there showing how I use some publicly available stuff in ways that I think are advantageous. Saber Sim specifically, because that's what I use. But I've walked through, things that I do in there. They're a little bit different than other people do probably. So we all kind of just have different skill sets. We all approach things differently. Highly recommend checking that out if you have not already. Link is in the description below. Now, starting on the Spurs side of this game, Castle showing up 44% of the time for me, 23% for the field. He is only $5,200, and he's just been playing pretty big minutes for San Antonio. I don't see anything that's going to make that go away tonight. Keldon Johnson is back, but Devin Vassell is still out. So I am still expecting low 30s in minutes from Castle. 0.83 DraftKings point per minute guy for the season. Hasn't shot well, but does have a 21% usage rate. So there is some upside there on nights where, his shot is falling a little bit better. I might be a minute high on him, might walk this back to like 32, but one way or the other, I do think he's a good value play here. 33 minutes last game, 34 the game before that, 35 the game before that. Keldon Johnson was in for 2 of those games, so I might actually not walk this back at all. I don't think I'm going to, now that I double-checked my work, and I think I was right the first time. So I do like getting to him. Wemby looks great. I mentioned him a second ago. Center only, so that is the only negative here. That is another reason probably that I'm not getting to a whole lot, or getting to any Gobert right now, and then it's going to be tough for me to get to Gobert in general, is that if you roster Wemby, you can only do it at center on DraftKings. You can play him at power forward on FanDuel, which is nice, but he is either the highest or second highest projected player on the slate. He is one of the best values on the slate, I think, despite being $10,800. Still just really, really underpriced. He came back from injury. They said they were going to monitor his minutes. They immediately played him 34 minutes. He played 34 of the game prior to his 3-game absence as well. He's up to a 31.5 minute per game average for the season. Just, playing more minutes, fully healthy, it seems. And I expect, 33, 34 minutes, assuming that this game's competitive and he avoids foul trouble, and just gives you upside in every category. Somebody mentioned averaging 5 blocks versus the Jazz. Just gives you rebound upside, scoring upside, block upside. He can just do everything on the floor. He's one of the best point per minute fantasy guys in the NBA. 1.58 DraftKings points per minute so far this season, 31.5% usage rate, 18% assist percentage, 18% rebounding percentage, 5.6 blocks per 100 possessions, 2 steals per 100 possessions. The guy just does it all and looks fantastic. Almost Made said no thoughts on Ant. I forgot to mention him, but yeah, he looks fine. I expect him to play 38 minutes. I think he's the guy that I have projected for the most minutes on the slate. The problem with him is that he's up to 9,500 and he is a guard. Mentioned it before, but opportunity cost at guard today is really high. And so that limits how much you can get to him. But The ceiling's really high, continuing to shoot a lot of threes. He's second or third in the NBA this year in 3-point attempts per game. And on top of that, his 3-point percentage has jumped from about 35 or 36% last year to 43 or 44% this year. Now, that jump may not hold, but it does seem likely, given that it's clearly something that he wanted to make a bigger part of his game. It is likely that he's a better 3-point shooter than he was last year, even if it's not 44% to 35%. Getting to some more of the Spurs here. Talked about Wemby. Tre Jones might not get this much of him, but I really like Tre Jones as a tournament play if he's going to be 5% owned. He's $3,400. He played minutes alongside Chris Paul last game, which is a really, really big deal, even if it's only a couple of minutes, to know that they are willing to do that. He closed both halves. Now, it was kind of weird rotations where Chris Paul only played the very end of both halves, but Tre Jones stayed on the floor when Chris Paul came back in. Tre Jones is only $3,400 here. He was already getting the backup point guard minutes behind Chris Paul, which means like 19 or 20 minutes, 18 to 20 minutes typically, if he's just the straight backup. So even if they do go back to that rotation, you're not drawing dead. It's a 5-game slate. He's $3,400. He's not been a good fantasy producer this season, but in the past, he hasn't been a terrible point per minute guy. And so you're not drawing dead if you do just get, the 18 or 19 minute game from him. 0.92 DraftKings points per minute since the start of last season. So I'm not overly concerned that he's only at 0.64 so far this year in 93 minutes played. But if they are just kind of ramping up his playing time, which I do think is likely given that he had missed a lot of time this season, and he's going to get 21, 22 minutes, he becomes really, really interesting given that nobody is playing him. So it's not that I'm super confident he does well. It's that I think he's underpriced even in his normal role by at least a little bit. And if there's the potential for him to get a couple of more minutes, it makes him look really, really good to me as a contrarian play in tournaments. He's also just going to allow me to play more of these popular guys that I do like, because once I have Tre Jones, I don't have to do a whole lot more to be different. Chris Paul, I'm not too far off the field, getting to 13% here at 6,300, getting small amounts of Champagnie and Keldon Johnson, field sub 10% on both. Champagnie probably playing around 30 minutes, Keldon probably playing around 28 off the bench. Nothing really interesting to say about either one. If they show up in lineups a little bit, that is fine. I didn't get to any Harrison Barnes, but he is basically the same thing as Champagnie. Should play 30, give or take. And if he shows up a little bit here and there, fine. If he doesn't, I don't really care. On the other side for Utah, curious here because I expected to be getting to a lot of Walker Kessler. I'm getting to him, not as much as I kind of thought I would be. Keontae George is the guy showing up the most for me. 24% projected ownership. He is only $5,500. I am getting the 42%. No Jordan Clarkson tonight. No Cody Williams. He is in the G League. And Keontae George has more consistently than Colin Sexton played big minutes without Jordan Clarkson. 3 games this year where Sexton and George have both been active and Clarkson has been out. 32, 33, and 38 minutes from Keontae George. 24 or 25, 26 and 34, I think, from Colin Sexton, averaging about 28 minutes. Not to say that, Sexton can't play a ton and have a good game here, but I am a little bit more confident in Keontae George's playing time. He's also a little bit cheaper at 5,500. He looks like a very good value to me. I am very happy to be getting to him, and basically 2x the field there as well, which I have no problem with. 0.9 DraftKings points per minute this year as well. So it's not like he's, a bad point per minute guy and I'm really reliant on the playing time. 0.95 DraftKings points per minute without Clarkson on the floor. Colin Sexton, 0.99 DraftKings points per minute without Clarkson out there. I projected him a little bit lower than the industry, I think, going to 29 minutes. He certainly can play 31, 32, but it's also not a guarantee. We are 1 or 2 games removed from basically this exact situation, and Sexton played like 24 minutes, which is, obviously less than he normally does. I went to 29 minutes. It still makes him look fine at 5,800, but like I said, I do prefer Keontae George, especially given that they are similarly owned. One other kind of question here is that there is a chance the Jazz end up looking, in hindsight, a lot better than I have them projected, because there is some chance they run a more condensed rotation today with Clarkson and Cody Williams out. My assumption, though, is that they will continue to run a 9.5 or 10-man rotation, because that's pretty much what they've been doing all season long. So I projected like 10 minutes, give or take, to go to Patty Mills. If you were to take those out, then you're potentially looking at like Keontae George and Sexton playing mid-30s, Collier playing mid to upper 20s, but that's just not the tendency that the Jazz have had so far this season. So it's not how I projected it. It is possible though. So it does add some volatility to the playing time projection in addition to what would normally be there. Walker Kessler getting 19% ownership at 5,800. I like him in tournaments here. He gives you block upside, gives you defensive stat upside, but he also played 35 minutes last game in his return from injury. And this team's rotation is, thinned out a little bit. I expect that Drew Eubanks will play most or all of the backup center minutes behind Kessler. But the fact that he played 35 minutes last game, and then now you have Wemby as clearly somebody that you want a defensive presence out there for. Not that, anybody's stopping Wemby, and obviously Wemby can step away from the basket and all of that. But I do think that Kessler's playing time looks pretty good here. If he loses minutes, it basically means one of two things need to happen. One, Drew Eubanks is playing a lot, which I don't think that's really solving anybody's problems with Wemby. Or John Collins needs to play a lot of minutes at the 5, which then means you have to allocate more minutes to wings. You don't have Cody Williams, so I assume Bryce Sensabaugh's in the rotation. I assume Johnny Juzang's in the rotation. But even giving them like 16 to 18 minutes apiece, that still is getting me this like 31-minute projection on Kessler. So if you were to really cut Kessler's minutes, unless you're just giving Eubanks a bunch more minutes than usual, it means that either Collins is playing a ton or you're getting like a lot more minutes from Juzang, Sensabaugh, Svi Mikhailuk is in the rotation, like kind of weird stuff like that. I think the kind of Occam's razor, like simplest approach is just Walker Kessler plays a bunch of minutes at $5,800, assuming he doesn't get in foul trouble. $7,300 for Collins. That price tag has gone up. Rebounding numbers should go down a little bit with Kessler back as well. Always prefer John Collins when he is playing not alongside a center, but still should be out there for plenty of minutes. He is still, a good point per minute guy overall. And he actually, in a limited sample alongside Kessler this year, has actually produced 1.28 DraftKings points per minute. One other thing to mention here too, that I guess makes me a little bit uncomfortable with the minutes, but I also just don't know what Utah can do about it. They don't like playing Markkanen, Collins, and Kessler all at the same time. They did start all three of them last game. I assume they're starting all three of them again today. And like I said, I don't think there's a whole lot you can do about it. Playing Eubanks isn't fixing anything. I think you'll probably see them stagger minutes like they did last game. They got Collins off the floor pretty quickly and then just subbed him back in when Kessler came out alongside Eubanks. So I think that's what they'll do, so that they're still playing the bulk of their minutes with only two of those guys out there. Markkanen should give you around 34 minutes or so. Fields ownership looks very efficient at 16%. I got the 15. And then I already mentioned Sexton, who, again, I think he's fine. But given the ownership here, basically, I just think that Keontae George is a slightly better play, slightly better projection at a lower salary and the same ownership. So I'm just going to end up playing more Keontae George. You can see that I basically have the same amount as the field when it comes to these two players. It's just that I allocated more of that total exposure to Keontae George than Colin Sexton. If Sexton's ownership comes down and George's goes up, then my exposure to George probably comes down and to Sexton goes up. But with the way it's projected right now, I would just want more Keontae George than Colin Sexton for the reasons that I said. Moving to the final game, Lakers taking on the Phoenix Suns, who are now basically healthy. Anthony Davis is likely to be the most popular Laker at about 18%. He is my highest owned Laker at 17%. Einsteinium asked earlier somewhere, why do I prefer Wemby over Anthony Davis? He just projects better for me. He's a better point per minute guy. Davis obviously really good, but Wemby just looks a little bit better. Davis is at 1.54 DraftKings points per minute this year. Wemby, I think, was 1.58. Going forward, I think Wemby's number could actually grow a little bit too. They are similarly priced. I do think, if you wanted to just play a little bit more Davis, that's fine. But I have Wemby projected, I think it was like 4 points higher. Wemby showed up at like 58 fantasy points for me here. Davis was at 54. And that's in a few less minutes for Wemby than Davis as well. So I think Davis is a good play. I do just prefer Wemby by a bit. Austin Reeves, LeBron James, both kind of secondary options, but guys I'm getting double digits of. They're not the best projected players. They're not the best point per dollar values, but they are still high upside guys. You should get around 34 minutes or so from Austin Reeves at 6,600. You should get 36 minutes from LeBron at 10K. Power forward and center eligible. Center not super useful since it's a position with high opportunity cost, but it is just one other way you can get him into lineups. 4,500 D'Angelo Russell playing 22-ish minutes off the bench. Does have enough of a ceiling at that price that he's somewhat interesting on a smaller slate in tournaments, but obviously not somebody I want to build around. And then the only other two guys getting any ownership here are Rui and Dalton Connect at 4,900 and 5,100 respectively. I projected them both for 28 minutes. I have a hard time going higher than that on either one. Doesn't make either of them show up. I think that if you were dead set on getting to one of them, the arguments would be for Rui that prior to his injury, he was playing 34 to 36 minutes. He only played 22 in a blowout against Denver. Yeah, I think, against Denver last time. Maybe he just goes back and plays 30 plus minutes, in which case he's underpriced. He could, do that by kind of just kicking Max Christie out of the rotation or something. So not it would be unheard of. For Dalton Connect, it would be, what if he makes 8 threes in a row? Does he ever come off the floor? Those would be the two cases, but at their salaries on this slate, it's just tough to get there. And then finally, wrapping things up with the Suns, who are not getting much ownership anywhere because Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal are both expected back. I am getting to some Yusuf Nurkic here at 6,200. If he's not going to get any ownership, I'm interested in tournaments. Clearly Durant, Beal, Booker are the priorities here offensively. When Durant and Beal were healthy previously, we had some bad Nurkic games where he just played really poorly and lost some minutes, but I don't think that's the plan going forward. We had Durant back when all that was happening, specifically talking about how Nurkic is a key part of this team, how, he's going to get it together, figure it out, all of that. I don't think that Nurkic is super likely to just not play a lot of minutes, especially if he's playing reasonably well. And that's really all we kind of care about for a low-owned guy in DFS is if Nurkic is producing fantasy points, he's probably playing well. And if he's probably playing well, he's probably just staying on the floor. So I'm a little bit higher on Nurk. I projected his minutes a little bit higher, I think, than the industry. I went to 28. I've seen him at 25, 26. I'm not super confident in that, but he played 33 minutes last time out. And I don't necessarily think that these guys coming back has any sort of real impact on his playing time. I think that it has an impact on his point per minute production, but that's at 6,200 less of a concern if he gets those minutes. Durant at 8,300 showing up 9% for me. Pretty much guessing. I went to 34 minutes on him. When he's healthy, he gives you 37, 38. So kind of like I was talking about with Scotty Barnes yesterday, it is projecting a quote unquote minutes limit, just not a very hard one. I think it's a reasonable projection here. He's been practicing, he's been scrimmaging. So, and also it's Kevin Durant. I think that it's pretty likely that the Suns were just not bringing him back until he can actually play. So unless we get that he's going to be on a strict minutes restriction, I am pretty comfortable projecting here. But again, it is kind of just me guessing. I went to 32 minutes on Beal for what that's worth. Devin Booker should play 36, 37 minutes at 9K. Same play basically as Damian Lillard. Same play as Anthony Edwards, where Devin Booker can score 50 real points. And if he does that, you need him to win a tournament. But he's not really different than Edwards. He's not different than other guys I mentioned, and there are a lot of good mid-range and cheap guards to get to that make it tough to prioritize here. Tyus Jones, I think maybe loses a couple of minutes with these guys back just because it does make it easier for Jones to not be in a closing lineup. So I did project him for 30 instead of his normal 32. Could be in the closing lineup, but Beal and Durant being back means that you can get a closing lineup where Devin Booker's the point guard, Beal is out there, Durant is out there, and then you have two of the wings or Nurkic, so some combination of Allen, Okogie, O'Neal, Nurkic. It just becomes easier for them to close without Tyus Jones if they want to, which they may or may not want to. Very small amount of Grayson Allen. He's 4,100. It's just kind of last piece in type filler. So no priorities here from the Suns, but I did want to mention Nurkic just because I do think that's kind of an interesting tournament spot where there's just volatility. Nobody really knows what this rotation is going to look like. Nobody really knows what his playing time is going to look like, but the playing time in general lately has been pretty good. One other thing to keep in mind, if you're looking at his average playing time this season, is that he did have a game, at least one game, I think two, where he got hurt during the game. I know he had one game where he played 14 minutes, but played 34 minutes on November 8th with Durant and Beal in. Let me double check. Played 34 minutes on November 8th with Durant and Beal in, played 33 minutes on November 6th with Durant and Beal in, played 28 minutes on November 4th with Durant and Beal in. Those are the last three games that Yusuf Nurkic played with Durant and Beal in. So I don't think 28 minutes is a super optimistic projection or anything. I think I'm actually leaving plenty of room for him to play even more minutes. So I like Nurk if nobody's going to play him for the reasons I said. So to recap everything, we're waiting on news on Mike Conley, who is questionable. If he's out, it's going to make DiVincenzo and Nickeil Alexander-Walker look better. It'll also open up more playmaking opportunities for Anthony Edwards potentially. Tank said Hero or Butler. I had very little of either one. I think they're both like 8% owned, just kind of last guy in type tournament plays. I don't think I had a Jimmy Butler lineup. I had Hero in a little bit. The answer is probably really either whichever you prefer, because they're about the same, or whichever, if one makes more sense at a different position or price or whatever. I think Butler's a couple $100 less than Hero. They are basically the same thing. Anthony said, I have 50% Castle. Talk me out of it, please. I don't know if you missed the Spurs part of this, but I have like 44% Castle right now. And the first thing I did was say, I think I need to lower his minutes, and then go back and realize that I think I projected him correctly. And it appears I'm just going to be living or dying with him, which doesn't feel great, but it's not the end of the world. He is pretty cheap. So Kyle Kuzma, Keyshawn George, not Jordan Poole, Sarr, Wemby, Brogdon, all looking like the most popular plays on the slate. I'm getting to a lot of those guys. Kuzma, George, Sarr, Castle, other George, Vooch, Wemby, my highest owned guys. Should be a pretty fun slate. Hope you guys have success. Hopefully you come in second to me. Thank you for checking out the show. I will honestly probably not be back tomorrow. I just don't know that I'm going to have time to project 15 games and do an hour, or in that case, hour and a half show. But make sure you do subscribe to this channel. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. I will confirm tomorrow what I'm doing. I just don't want to commit right now to doing a show and then it get to 4:00 and I'm only halfway done and can't do it. So I will tweet or post when the show is, if there is one tomorrow. If not, have a good Thanksgiving. No NBA on Thursday. There are NFL games, and I will definitely be back Friday if I'm not here tomorrow. Thanks again. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button on the way out as well, and good luck on your lineups tonight.